Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for the Accounting Partner July series. Today we're going to talk about getting ready for audits. A lot of our clients maybe aren't yet in audits, but you never know when they're going to be ready. And we need to prepare now as opposed to waiting for the audit to prepare. So we'll go through some best practices and also get into showing you what Cryptio is doing to help make your audits a little smoother. Next slide, Tremaine. We're going to go into high level, what it means to be audit ready. We're going to go into all the different changes that Cryptio has been making over the last quarter. It's been our primary focus, not just giving everyone an accounting application for crypto, but making sure that it's the best one, and that when we ultimately have to stand up to audits, that our lives are a lot easier, because a lot of us have been through audits. We know what a pain they could be ultimately. We'll get into some Q&A, also give some helpful resources, share some upcoming events that we have, and just get more people to join our community and have an open conversation. All right, so what does it mean to be audit ready? Just a little background on myself. I started in accounting, pure accounting, at a consulting company, Protiviti. That was during the SOX boom, and I think it gave me a really good background in just concentrating on what's needed for an audit, because SOX, or Sarbanes-Oxley, is really the heart of where a lot of audits start. It all starts with documentation, controls, and just a framework before you even start anything. So what we really need to focus on is the process walkthrough documentation. When starting an audit, if you have every process labeled out from beginning to end, the different steps, who's responsible, who's reviewing, who's approving, identifying different controls within these processes, and every single aspect of where it starts, or what I like to say is the life cycle of the trade. A trade is conducted, or even before the trade's conducted, compliance happens with a counterparty. But documenting every single step along the way to make sure that when you book your financials, you know that your financials are accurate in the very end state. So I've done many audits, and starting off with handing over process documentation with identified controls in place makes the audit start a lot easier. It gives the auditors an ease of knowing that you know what to do and that their audit should go a lot easier. With that is also identifying different internal controls. On top of the process walkthrough documentation, it's creating a risk control framework. And what this does is, by every department and every group, you identify all the different risks in place that could potentially impact your financial reporting. And then with those risks, what kind of controls do you have in place? And who's doing these controls? And how are these controls performed? And with these two things to start an audit, it makes the audit start in a different aspect, as opposed to not having it and having to talk them through or show them all your processes. So once you get all that in place, and it's something that a lot of companies just push off, it takes time. You need resources. It takes a lot of time to review and approve and make sure it's right, and also stay on top of quarterly to make sure as you add processes, they get added to this documentation. So once you get all the documentation in place, it's maintaining supporting documentation. So you're going to have all these processes in place from beginning to end, and you're going to start booking your journal entries. Now, a lot of people are through month end, they're rushing through it. They have multiple things to do on top of their daily responsibilities. They make journal entries and they move on. Now, one thing I found is super helpful is maintaining the supporting documentation around each of the journal entries. It does take extra time, but in the end, it'll save you time, especially when going through an audit. It'll give your senior level management the comfort when reviewing and approving these journal entries or their financials on a monthly, quarterly basis, that they understand exactly why journal entries are being made. They don't need to ask. They could go into a journal entry. They could pull the support. And if it's not in the journal entry itself, it's making sure that you maintain the documentation for each journal entry and each process that you're completing, and make sure it doesn't change. I know at BlockFi, more recently before coming over to Cryptio, we were out of G Sheets, we were out of Excel, constantly breaking spreadsheets, constantly changing G Sheets. It was making sure that we made the data static so it didn't change. So when it came time to provide the supporting documentation, we had something legible to give over. If not, you're spending tons more hours trying to recreate something which you might not even be responsible for doing. You have turnover in a company, you have people doing processes, and they may not be there anymore. So maintaining that documentation that has previously been done, right or wrong, it's a reason why you made a journal entry. It's very important to maintain that documentation. On top of that, just being on top of all the different regulations and compliance within the accounting rules. Things are constantly changing. It could be difficult to stay on top of if it's not, your one of your sole responsibilities. So it's just making sure that you have communities like this, that you have people that you could ask, that you understand the right things to do and the right ways to do them, especially in a changing environment like this. I think it also starts off with strong audit team collaboration. When the audit team comes in, I've seen way too many times where companies get put on the defense. They're trying to justify why they're doing things because they're getting asked tons of questions. Some of the questions could be offensive, some could be intrusive, but in the end, the auditors are just trying to figure out if the financials are correct. And a lot of it's testing the staff you have, but it's making sure that you have that relationship. So some challenges getting into that and staying on the staff is a lot of people and companies are trying to do more with less. They'll cut some resources. They'll tell other resources, you have to now do this process. So you have a challenge of getting the documentation correct. You have the challenge of getting the processes completed timely and correctly. There's also the challenge of, especially in the world of crypto, getting the talent that understands crypto and understands exactly what's needed for crypto and crypto audits. So there's a lot of challenges around staffing resources and limitations of really talented resources. I went into, in-depth collecting and maintaining evidence of supporting documentation. I mean, I've way too many times gone back and had to recreate support for journal entries from scratch. And it's really just a pain in the ass, takes time. And sometimes you never even get to the final state, because maybe you're recreating someone else's work and maybe they didn't do it correctly and you're doing it correctly and you don't know what they did incorrectly. So making sure you maintain that's super important. Risk assessments, this goes back to maintaining proper documentation and a risk control matrix. As you add new processes or as you do different things within your organization, add new revenue streams, it's making sure that you identify the proper risks that come in place from these different processes, and making sure you document them and really think about what are you doing and what are the risks to my financials if I don't get this correct, and what are the different pain points along the way which I need to add controls to, where there's different levels of approval. And just staying on top of this, it's a challenge because a lot of times people or companies go through this process of process documentation or control documentation, and they think they're done, but it's an ever-evolving process that companies need to do. Now, when getting into the audits, I've seen a lot too where there's been a lack of cooperation from staff. They get mad that auditors are asking questions, and ultimately it makes the audit a lot more difficult. So I think just making sure that you make the auditors your friends, that you understand where they're coming from. They might be asking very basic, very stupid questions. They might even be learning on the way. But it's making sure that you treat them with respect and dignity, because in the end, a material deficiency that they identify, it could be downgraded. A lot of it's judgmental on their side too. So making sure you maintain a proper relationship throughout the audit is super important. And on top of that, I think cooperation also comes down to timeliness. I've found that as you work with auditors, and if they send a request or if they have a request list with a due date, getting it to them before and getting it to them very, very timely instead of making them wait or making them follow up multiple times, it helps an audit go a lot smoother. We already touched on the regulatory changes. It's a challenge because a lot of companies don't have someone solely designated to, identify these changes. And we also have a lot of different technologies in place. Technologies help streamline processes, but if the right technology is not put in place, it can make your audit even more difficult. If they don't have SOC 1, SOC 2, Type 2, to give auditors immediate comfort, you could be fighting an uphill battle. If it's an internal system, the audit the audit costs from making this internal system and giving auditors comfort around what the system is doing, it could be a lot more challenging than just, it's the buy versus build argument. But there's different arguments you can make, but technology definitely adds to complexities with audits, especially getting into crypto, because there's not a lot of solid technology to handle crypto. So getting auditors comfortable with this could be a challenge. All right, on to you, Tremaine. I guess before we move on, any questions specifically about just getting audit ready in general, or any additional topics or things that you think I maybe missed? And if not, we'll move on.
Okay, cool. Well, if no questions on that first section tonight, thank you, Jeff. I'm going to jump into a quick demo of the new audit readiness module that we launched, which is centered around everything that Jeff just went over in terms of getting yourself audit ready and streamlining that process. Okay. Jeff, can you see my screen okay?
I can. And just to answer your question, Corey, we don't have a list yet. It's something we're working on. It's something we're trying to help identify within a checklist what Cryptio is doing for you. So in a snapshot, you'll be able to see what we do and what we don't do. So a company understands, the controls that they need to do themselves and the controls that Cryptio, 98% of the time will cover for them. So it's something we're working on, and we'll share with everyone once it's complete.
And just to piggyback on that too as well, Corey, we're going to be doing this for all of the different processes. So not just an audit request list, but even things like in the month-end process or financial statement prep. Basically just a one-pager guide for how Cryptio what's the best practice for each of these workflows and how we get you there through Cryptio. Okay, cool. So I'm going to jump into the demo here. So everything that Jeff just mentioned is extremely crucial when it comes to the audit. And one of the things that we thought about as our customer base starts to grow is how do we streamline this process for you? Because we sort of position ourselves not only as an accounting subledger, but primarily focused with making sure that you're audit ready and you can pass audits with no issues. That brings me into our audit readiness module. And essentially what this does is it sort of mimics what the audit process is like and what the audit tests are like, and allows you to incorporate that into your regular Cryptio journey. And what we mean by that is all the tests around accuracy, all the tests around completeness, and all the tests around just how you manage your workspace in general is incorporated all into this one section. And just to start with the accuracy side of things. So on the left-hand side here, when you come to audit readiness, you can see we have a section called data integrity. And what this does is it's a live module that continually checks for discrepancies within the transaction data that we have within Cryptio. The three areas that we check are your balances, your prices, and your transaction list. So if you have any missing transactions. The first section around balances, we essentially look at all of the sources that you have imported into Cryptio. So all of your wallets, all of your exchanges, et cetera, and we compare the balance that we have for each of these sources to your live on-chain balance, the same way that an auditor would, to test that the balance that we're seeing within your accounting subledger actually ties back to the source of truth on-chain. And what that looks like is If you come here and you come down to balance sanity check, you can see a list of all of the wallets that you have imported. So here in the demo workspace, we have a variation between Polygon, Ethereum, and Bitcoin. You can see all of the assets that you have held within each of these sources. And you can see within our check back to the on-chain data, if there's any discrepancy between what we're showing for your asset balance and what you have actually on-chain. And this is very similar to the process that an auditor will do, where they'll sample test some of your balances to make sure that nothing is missing. And if something is missing, is there good documentation around this? That sort of brings me to the overarching theme of really the point of these tests. Ultimately, because this is crypto and because nothing ever works as it should 100% of the time, it's not really to get a 100% completeness in terms of your balances or your prices, but it's that in the event that there are any discrepancies, it's at least something that you're aware of and something that's well documented in terms of why the discrepancy exists. So for example, if, for balances, if you have a lot of off-chain transactions, that might not be something that we directly interact with because these are not on-chain sources that we can reconcile back to. But if this discrepancy is present and you're aware of it, in the top right-hand corner here, you can generate what we call a balance sanity check report, which is essentially your documentation that you completed this step of validating your balances. And in here, you can include notes around, I have a discrepancy of X on this asset that's due to this on-chain, this off-chain activity that Cryptio doesn't pull in automatically. And the purpose of this, sort of going back to what Jeff said earlier, is that when you get into an audit, the best thing that you can do is to be 100% prepared with documentation that you can hand to them, and they're not necessarily the ones catching things and pointing it out to you. It's more the other way around. The next section here in the data integrity is around prices. So very similar to how we check balances, here what we do is we go through all of the transactions that you have imported into Cryptio, and we look to see that all of these are priced correctly based on the principal market that you pick. So very similarly here, the goal is not to have 100% completeness, because you could have asset types that you hold within your wallets that don't have, let's say, a price that's available on a principal market like CoinGecko or Coinbase. And a good example of these would be things like spam tokens that have low liquidity, so there's no price available. Another example could be liquidity pool tokens, where these just serve as a contra asset to show that you have collateral deposited into these liquidity pool, but they might not have actual prices on chain. The point of this module, very, very similarly to the balance check, is that you're aware of any missing prices that are within the workspace and that it's well documented. And the beauty of this is everything here that you can see, not only do you see the asset, you can see how many movements are associated with it. You can see what's the percentage of missing prices, and you can also select see movement to get you directly to it. So for example, if I click on this, it brings me directly to the transaction.
Progress.
It brings me directly to what's the asset, and it shows here that there's a missing price. So it could be the case that maybe this requires like a custom pricing on your end, but the beauty of this is that you can do it all within one module, as opposed to having to bounce around, generating different reports, and then having to do that reconciliation sort of one by one, if you will. The last bit that I want to touch on the data integrity side is cost basis sanity check. And this basically is how we check that there are no missing transactions within the workspace. So if for any event, balances start to go negative, or we can see that there's discrepancy on the balance sanity check side, that when we come here, it also flows over because there's missing deposits due to API issues. Like, for example, I'm sure many people here are aware of like Binance API issues or Kraken or things like that. Here is where you could pick up some of these potential movements that are causing the missing volumes. And very similarly to the prices sanity check, it'll have a list of the transactions, and you can click into these, you can investigate it separately. But the point is, we want to sort of streamline the process that an auditor would go through and incorporate that into your regular workflow. That way, when you come to your audit at the end of the year, at this point, if you're doing this on a monthly basis, you'll have a full year's worth of support and documentation, and that's all saved down that you can hand directly over to an auditor. Before I jump into inventory, I do want to sort of wrap up with a quick best practice summary from Ash and our customer success team. So Ash, if you want to jump in and just kind of wrap up the data integrity side.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess on my side, when it comes to best practices for the data integrity module, the biggest best practice is just scheduling your sanity checks. So if you're doing month end, let's say on the first week of the following month, you might want to have your sanity check that automatically updates all of your wallets at the end of the month. So like, or on the first of the following month. So leveraging the automation there with the scheduler. Other than that, like what Jeff and Tremaine have said, like plenty of times, like documentation's everything. Make sure you have like your G drives or however you're doing it with like month by month documentation of each of your sanity checks, and just regularly go back and check the audit readiness module, just to make sure that if there are issues there, to resolve them using our support center or reach out to us and we can help you as well. That's it from my side.
Cool, thanks, Ash. So that's basically it on the accuracy side of things in terms of the module. The next step here that we want to jump into is focus on the completeness side of things, which is another core part of the audit testing process and what auditors look for as they go through their internal testing. This section here is completely dedicated to inventory, and that means your wallets, your chains, what you have imported. And what this is focused on is, a lot of times what we've seen in the past is that you may have a wallet imported on one chain, but you might also have activity on other chains for the same wallet that you may have forgotten to import. And this is something that happens all the time. As you all know, just the accounting process around cryptocurrency is really hectic and really busy, and things tend to slip through the crack. The purpose of this module here is to give you a way to sort of see, okay, for all of the wallets that I have imported into Cryptio, are there potentially any other networks or chains that this wallet is available on that isn't imported, that might have transactions that I need imported into Cryptio? And the highlight here, very similar to the data integrity side, is that you might not need to import all of these if you don't actually use this wallet, let's say on another chain. But what we want to do is bring to your attention very quickly, so that way you can sort of walk through things like a business as usual. Like I hop into audit readiness, and here I just go through my steps, and I know once I get through all of these, I've sort of covered all of the areas that an auditor would, just in the ordinary course of doing my accounting. And what's here and what I can jump into to show you is, for example, you can see the address of the wallets imported. You can see on what network these wallets have been imported. And you can see potentially what are the other networks that this wallet is also available on. And very similar to the data integrity side, you can do this all within the same dashboard view. You can select import here, and that'll bring you right back to your import sources section. So all of this is going to be within one place where you can not only identify discrepancies, but you can also reconcile it and move on to the next section. Ash, any best practices on the EVM side of things?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. I think on this one, the main thing is like, if you want to clear out the amount of wallets showing on your EVM list. So a lot of the times you'll have, airdrops across random chains where like random people will just drop, like do airdrops, and this will make the inventory module actually show like, hey, you have, like 20 wallets that you need to import. What could be good is actually taking a sample of these wallets and going in and actually checking each one to see whether, so you take the address, you go to the block explorer, and you see whether there's just like spam transactions or if there's genuine transactions there. And then in the inventory module, you can like hide them from your view. So that's pretty handy. But I guess the other one here is when you're onboarding new, like let's say you're an account, you're a firm and you've just onboarded a new customer. In that case, what you want to do is like verify that the wallet list that your client has given you is complete. And what you can do is point them into the direction of this this tool and get them to review if there's any extra wallets that they've missed. But yeah, that's everything from my side.
Cool. Thank you, Ash. And very similar to the data integrity side, as always, because the thing we want to hammer home is documentation, documentation, documentation. You can generate a report at the end of your testing process here. And if you do this, let's say on a monthly basis or quarterly basis or whatever your cadence is, it's a good way to show an auditor that not only do you have a policy of doing this, but here's the evidence that we've acted on these testing periodically over the period of the fiscal year. And by the way, at the end of this, we're going to have a Q&A section. So if it feels like there's a lot of questions coming in and we haven't gotten to them yet, we definitely will be once we get through the module. The last section here that we cover, which is extremely important as well, is the reconciliation module. So now that we've sort of gotten through the accuracy side of things and the completeness side of things, so now you feel comfortable that I have all of my sources in, I feel comfortable that all of the transaction data that's in is accurate in the context of there's no missing prices and the balances are good. The next thing is, how are all of these transactions mapped? And this section here is dedicated to sort of giving you a snapshot view of all of the transactions within your workspace. What's the percentage of them that's not mapped? How much has been synced over to your ERP software? And how many labels that you have created that isn't directly mapped to anything. Now, this is a demo workspace, so that's why these numbers look extremely high. But this would be a good example of if you're a new client and you come in and let's say you've set up all of your labels, but you haven't set up any mapping or any sort of ERP functionality yet. This module would be a constant reminder to you that you have these steps outstanding. So for example, here, it will show you not only what are the number of incomplete transactions that aren't mapped. Within the same view, will also give you a list here where you can see the transactions yourself. You can do the labeling, you can do the mapping all within this view. You can also select here where we have labels not mapped, and that'll bring you directly over to your labels section within the product, where you can then proceed to map all of these as you need to. And very similar to the other two, and this is sort of the point to always drive home, is that it might not be the case that you necessarily want every label mapped. Maybe you use some just for tracking purposes. It might be the case that you have immaterial transactions that aren't mapped, but you're aware of them and it's not a huge concern. But the point that we want to sort of drive home with this module, and what we want to, the value add that we want to bring to you, is that we're streamlining the way how you interact with these different issues, as opposed to you having to sort of go one by one and figure this out on your own, as we've seen with people having to download multiple reports and things like this to get to the same goal.
And Tremaine,
at the top.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
go on.
No, jump in, Jeff, jump in.
I was going to just ask you to jump into the control and risk when you were done. But I personally like that tab of the audit readiness.
Definitely. I think that should be the last section on my side, actually.
Great.
So Jeff, I'm glad you're getting everyone excited for this. Ash, do you want to jump in just to give some best practices before?
Yeah, for sure. So with this one, again, there's 4 clear steps, and ultimately what you're ensuring following these 4 clear steps on the screen is just like really clean accounting hygiene, so that, you know, everything that you book has gone through a process of being validated. Any errors are like given to you, and you have the steps to resolve them. But yeah, like the best practice here is actually is on the screen and following these steps.
Cool. Thanks, Ash. And by the way, everything here we're going to be sharing with all the participants, so you'll get a full copy of the slide deck that you can sort of dig into, just for being conscious of the time. And then last but not least, as Jeff mentioned, we have this all wrapped up into a bow tie in what we call a controls and risk management module. And basically, this is your way of automating everything that I just talked about with data integrity, inventory, and reconciliation, all within one view. And what it does is we give you a recommendation for each of the different tests that I covered. So the data integrity tests, the inventory tests, and the reconciliation tests. You can identify within your organization who is the person that's in charge of covering these tests. So, you know, it might be the case that one person is covering all the data integrity, one person is in charge of, you know, reviewing completeness and reconciliation in terms of the mapping. Here is where you can identify all of these. You can identify a reviewer. And for each step, you can essentially go through one by one. You can select test. It will bring you directly to the area in the product, just like I went over earlier. It'll give you a step-by-step guide of what's sort of the best practice way to approach the module. And at the end of it, there's a recommendation of generating a report. What that looks like ultimately, and I want to here just to show you. Once you get through all of the different tests, we create a testing trail for you, or essentially an audit trail that you can see, okay, if I know, let's say my plan is for each month, I want these tests done, I can see clearly who did the test, what test was done, and at what time. And this not only updates here on the testing trail side, it also updates here in the module itself. So it'll tell you when was the last testing date. So let's say it's the, you know, you're going through your month-end close process and you're not sure, you know, you probably started a couple of tests, you're not sure which ones you've gotten through. Here we've documented all of this for you. So you can always get a rolling sort of idea of, okay, this is where I'm at, this is what I need to get done. And at the end, you can generate an audit trail report. And this audit trail report is essentially putting all of this and hammering home the point of documentation that we've probably annoyingly mentioned in this webinar, that you can hand over to an auditor at the end of the period. And it's so the way to think about this is really, you could even just use this as your go-to to get through each of the three that I mentioned earlier. If you do have any reason to want to go through each of them, you can easily access them by going to the left-hand side. But just in terms of thinking about your workflow, you could essentially just come to your controls and risk management, go through the tests, and assuming you complete everything here, that should cover you in terms of everything that we've talked about today. Ash, want to wrap us up?
So I think, yeah, I mean, like, you know, we went through each one of these already. I think the best thing to do here is let's jump to the Q&A. We have some great questions that we can spend some time answering as well. So we have. So we had a question around spam. I just want to address that because it's it's something we're spending a lot of time in this coming weeks to solve. So right now we're having a complete revamp of like the accuracy of our ability to identify spam tokens and auto mark them as spam. We also have released a new asset clustering asset module, sorry, which soon, in about like 1 or 2 months, you'll be able to mark assets that are spam as spam, and all of these assets marked as spam will be removed from your audit readiness module, so from the data integrity module, from the reports, and from your entire workspace. If that answers your question, Christina.
Yes, thanks. Thanks a lot.
No problem. We also had a question, Tremaine, on what do you do if your principal market provider goes away? So FTX or Binance US. How do you, what do you do in that situation?
Yeah, so I would say, let's use an FTX as a good example here. I mean, that would be unfortunate just to start. But secondarily, I think if you run into the case where you have typically most of your assets priced on a principal market that's no longer valid, here there's usually the recommendation of, well, one, is it limited to a specific number of assets, or have you been pricing all of your assets on this principal market itself? If that's the case, this is a good audit case now for you to move and convert, let's say, your principal market from X to Y, because ultimately, even though just on the topic of principal markets, there's a preference for customers and companies to use markets that are singular in terms of how they do the pricing. So let's say Coinbase, for example, where they don't aggregate data from multiple sources, they use their own trading data in order to create pricing. Typically, auditors like this because it's easier to test, it's more transparent, things like this. But in the event that, let's say, there's reason to doubt the trustworthiness or the reliability of the data on the exchange, whether it's because of an FTX where it goes under, or they can see evidence of market manipulation, or if it's a data aggregator like CoinGecko that might be bringing in some sources that they might not trust. Here within Cryptio also, we allow you to price assets not just by the workspace, but you could price individual assets by different principal markets. So if FTX goes away, you can easily switch your entire workspace to a new principal market. If it's limited to a number of assets, you can specifically for those assets start to price them on, let's say, a more preferred market, depending on the situation. I think ultimately a lot of this tends to come down to audit preference. The recommendation is always to lean towards markets like Coinbase, Binance, that give you a singular, or that have a singular pricing method based on their own trading data. But if that's not available, CoinGecko is always your second best bet, because ultimately the goal is to have everything priced. And even if it's not all on the ideal market, it's that it's well documented and when supported.
And we'll also have a report, an audit report showing when you change your principal market. So there's no question for your auditor when looking at this, like what's changed, when did it change? And, it could easily be explained by you why it was changed. So it's fully transparent what's going on, behind the scenes at Cryptio as well.
Cool. We had one last question, and then we'll jump to some closing remarks. So we had a question around what was it? Yeah, so what is an example of a off-chain event? So like off-chain events are essentially like DeFi activity that there's no deposit or withdrawal that actually happens in your wallet, and the token balance accrues or decreases almost live, right? So off-chain, as in like there's no transaction history of it, but it just happens in your wallet. So let's say you deposit some ETH into Avo, and you get an interest-bearing token. The balance or your interest accrues on the token level and not the like wallet level, essentially. Cool. Should we jump to the next slides, Tremaine?
I think that there's also a question on discrepancies and balances. I think an important thing to note is that if it's all on chain, I mean, there are ever-changing on-chain activities. One thing it helps, like when you raise a ticket, we have the ability, since we index these in-house, to reindex the chains and quickly resolve the discrepancies, as opposed to putting in a ticket with a third-party data provider, which could take months. So the ability that Cryptio has to turn around discrepancies is very fast. But it also it's something great to have our client base to help identify changes on the blockchain, so we could identify these changes and fix them.
And just to that point, Jeff, sorry, Christina, we almost missed that question. In the event that you might also have manual transactions that are imported as well, there's sort of a list, and Ash and his team will usually help you with this in terms of identifying, okay, we can clearly see that there's a discrepancy in the balance. Here are some of the traditional reasons why, or some of the common reasons. We can explore each of these and figure out what's the best way to get you to that place. So a lot of that is in collaboration with us and also you as the customer.
And I think one more, Andrew, from Andrew, if you switch the principal market, we have a lock ability within Cryptio. So what you would do is you would lock Cryptio. Nothing would change previously. You'd make sure all your entries are made through that lock period. Once you make the change, it'll be in effect going forward. So you could pick a point in time and make sure that nothing historically changes. Or if you want to pick a period looking back, it'll change everything to that period looking back. And you could change, let's say, to the start of 2023, if that's your choice.
Cool. So just to wrap up here, so everything that we mentioned, as always, is available on our website. We're going to be sharing this deck, and in the deck, you're going to be able to download a free guide. But also, if you just have general questions about the product or anything we went over today, you can head over to support.cryptio.co, and you'll be able to access all of our guides and the different parts of the product, including everything that we went over today. Exciting
And
stuff.
we're
Jeff, over to you.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of exciting stuff in September. August is going to be a little bit slower. We've been at a lot of different conferences, but something new in New York City just prior to mainnet. We're going to hold a crypto finance forum. This is for all of us accounting professionals, the finance department, COO, CFO, everyone under the finance umbrella. To have a conference just prior to mainnet, a little more focused on our interest, so we could meet people relevant to our industry and what they're doing and have really good conversations. We're also going to have a lot of very focused and relevant panels and speakers that are going to be there. Some very high level speakers as well. So check it out. We'll send out the link to our website to this. It's going to be September 19th. Would love to have you there. Would love to have you invite whatever guests you want to this event. But it should be a really fun one to spark off the start of mainnet, which is a very, very popular crypto conference in the heart of New York City. So looking forward to seeing people there.
And we also have our Telegram channel as well as our newsletter. So for all of the accounting partners, check that out. Alex has dropped the link into the chat now. It's a great way to stay up to date with even our latest product releases as well. And I think that's it.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. This has been really good.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your week.
Bye, everyone.